Hello and welcome to Dave Hill's podcasting incident with me, Dave Hill, the pride of Cleveland and beyond. I once got a really nice foot massage at the Cracker Barrel just outside of Akron. And mister, if you're listening, thank you again. And it's a really nice van you had. I hope it's still in good shape. Anyway, did I say thank you for joining me once again, listeners? Dear listener, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me and my partner in crime, Chris Gersbeck, in delivering this rambling hour of content each and every week. Thank you to everyone rating, reviewing, and subscribing on iTunes, Stitcher, and beyond. Thank you to my new listeners on Fubar. I love Fubar in the UK. They give me snacks when I come there. I can't say enough things about them. And thank you always to the fine folks supporting us on Patreon. If you're listening to this podcast and you want to keep gas in the tank and keep this incredible content coming your way and growing and expanding, and there's t-shirts and patches and gang member nicknames, etc. Please do your part. Patreon.com/Dave Hill. Or go to patreon.com. Plug in Dave Hill. Don't feel obligated to do this. I'm just saying, if you feel like it, whatever. I'll be fine. Oh, God. Oh, and did I thank, for example, Alexander Turner, Ron Bailey, and Evan Baumgartner? I think I thanked at least a couple of those folks already, but I wanted to thank you again in case I didn't. And thanks to everyone else who's continued to support us on Patreon. And it's a really cool scene if you want to become a part of the magic. Anyway, enough about that. I don't know if you can tell. I have plague-like symptoms today. I've been going pretty hard lately. Where was I? I was in Montreal last week. That's in France. No, it's in Canada. That was really fun. I did a show with my buddy Nick Flanagan. It was snowing. And Micah, and I can't remember her last name, she was great. Birds of Paradise, great band. I did not have any poutine. I don't know what happened there. I did have a nice Montreal bagel. That was at the airport. Probably compromised in some way, now that I'm thinking about it. I shot an incredible Hollywood movie in Rochester, New York. Drunk bus movie, which would be called Out of Service in theaters, I believe. Did I talk about all this already? When you take as much cold medicine, when you don't follow the label, when you just swing for the fences like I do, sometimes things get away from you, and you end up repeating yourself and winding up in the Port Authority men's room at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday. That's a story for another time. Anyway, we have an incredible episode for you today, and so many more incredible. We've been banking episodes, as they say in the industry, which is when you record them ahead of time and then release them later. And we have another exciting new podcast coming out, and another one, and another one. Anyway, but today's episode is really exciting. As many of you who have listened in the past to my radio show, The Goddamn Dave Hill Show, now on hiatus currently, hopefully coming back with guns blazing at some point. I love talking about guitars and gear and stuff. Warning, we don't get into too much of that on this episode, as much as I'd like to. But my guest today is incredible. He's an incredible player, an incredible fellow, also from the Midwest like me. Dave, did you just talk to yourself the whole time? Yes and no. No, it's a different person. Scott Sharrard. He's a great guitar player, musician, singer, and was the band leader for the Greg Allman Band. I had to resist and asking all sorts of questions about Greg Allman, like what is Greg Allman like for breakfast? What is Greg Allman like for lunch? What is Greg Allman's favorite TV shows? Stuff like that. I held off. I controlled myself. I played it super cool. I think you'd all be really proud of me with how I handled myself. I'd hoped to get into some pedal talk, some gear talk. We get into a little guitar talk. Just enough. You won't feel like you're at a Guitar Center or anything. Oh God, just drinking some coffee. Let's just get into it. This is my lovely conversation with Mr. Scott Sharrard. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed having him over to my house for beverages and a dog that is uncontrollable named Lucy.
The music business ain't what it used to be.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, that's smart. That's smart in many ways. Power trio.
Yeah.
Less people to wrangle, less people to pay.
Yeah, I mean, just we don't, the guarantees just aren't out there like they used to be, or I should say even the secondary line item budgets, like advances from record labels or record sales or even royalties are down by like 75, 80% compared to the 1970s or 1980s.
Yeah, I got in a gentlemanly, someone posted on Twitter, like, about saying, like, once a band has put their song in a commercial, they're dead to me. And I was just like...
The Black Keys' whole story of success was that they landed, I think it was a spot in the UK. Mm-hmm. They landed a commercial spot with one of their pieces of music, and it paid a ridiculous amount of money. Like $150,000 or something like that. You can look this up. It's well documented online. But they got a huge payout with that. Their manager got for them, and then he landed a couple more. And they were really lucky because they were overseas. So it was kind of on the down low over here that they were making all this cake from these commercials, right?
Yeah.
Licensing their songs to commercials. But now you would never get those numbers. There's no way. Things have been rapidly declining at such a pace in our business that now it's like one of those buyouts that would have been $100,000 is now like $20,000.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah, and it just keeps every year. It goes down, 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 and Spotify stock goes up, up, up.
Yeah, how? Yeah, I have no idea. How is a... You just have to play live and have people show up then, right?
Well, people have been saying that for a few years. Nope, that's not how it works either.
How does one do it?
I just watched the Fire Festival documentary on Hulu last
one?
night. The Hulu
I haven't
one.
seen that.
You got to see the Hulu one.
I haven't. Chris, have you watched those yet?
Both of them, yeah.
Chris is over here.
Multiple times.
So I think you agree the Hulu one seems a little bit more legit. What do you think?
It does, but they paid that guy to be in it.
Okay, so there's all kinds of problems with both of them.
Uh-huh.
I agree.
The Netflix one was produced by the social media company.
Right.
That did the social media for them.
So I think if you want to know where entertainment or making money in entertainment is at, watch that. Even though it's not explicitly about that, a lot of the circumstances of where we're at in promoting live music, for example, because it was a live music festival.
Yeah.
All the things that are sewn into it, obviously it's a colossal disaster at every level perpetrated by a guy who's clearly, like a low-level used car salesman fraud.
Who is it? Who's the main guy?
What's his name again?
McFarland?
That's it. McFarland, yeah.
And it's him and Ja Rule?
Well, Ja's like he's like he's the figurehead. He's like the Mickey Mouse to the Walt Disney, He doesn't really know what the hell's going on.
And
does he?
Maybe, yeah. Well, someone was saying that he got drunk on some podcast or something and was just like, yeah.
That's in the end of the Hulu documentary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they show it. Yeah, he claims to be like a mastermind of it, which is pretty funny. But that thing, in a nutshell, it's all about social media presence. I mean, if you want to get to the point where you're packing shows and you have actual record labels interested in you, I mean, first of all, no record label is going to touch you until you can move 500 to 1,000 tickets a night at the least, or until your guarantees are at such a point where you don't need them.
Yeah.
And then the other side of that is the social media presence, right? So until they see some ridiculous reflection of you being what they call an influencer, nobody who's in the music establishment is going to take part in what you do, whether that be Live Nation as a promoter, or that be a major record label, or that be an agent, a booking agent. And really, at this point, to be honest with you, man, The people who really control the music business are the promoters, Live Nation, and the booking agents. Like, the booking agents have reached such a level of power that they're even involved with their artists at a creative level at this point. Their influence, I cannot stress to you how influential booking agents are. They remind me of, I'm 42, I'm old enough to have gone through the end of the music business pretty much. And, I went through with my first band, the Chesterfields, we went through like the whole development deal thing and the having labels come down to shows thing. And
And what era was that when you were doing that?
Well, that started when I moved here in like 98.
Oh yeah, so yeah,
99.
And then into like the early 2000s, right?
2001 was about when we stopped, when we kind of gave up hope that things were going to turn around. But there was that 2 or 3 year period where everyone was acting like the 90s were going to continue as normal. And a lot of it had to do with like suing kids for stealing music and doing a bunch of really knuckleheaded shit that, for film and television, they were smart enough to go with the times, and that's why Netflix and HBO and Showtime and there's all these platforms for creative content for that art form now. Yeah. But music went the other way and it killed itself in the process,
Yeah. What do you think is the future of like how I was just talking about this earlier today because at least once a week I talk about how the internet has destroyed everything, but music probably most of all, like in terms of the business of it.
The business destroyed it, not the internet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so it ate itself.
No, the idiots who were running it at the time. The guys who were running the conglomerates. And, of course, the whole other side of the story of this is the conglomerate, the consumption of all the classic labels, Atlantic, deteriorating into, another corporate pond that could have been selling Xboxes instead of records.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the mentality. It was a corporate mentality, soup to nuts, that was driving. And, of course, Atlantic is ascendant again now because of their involvement in hip-hop, as an example. But really what allowed them to be ascendant is that, this is well documented across many different articles. The Wall Street Journal had an article, I believe it was last year. The corporate record industry, they posted their biggest earnings in history.
Oh, really?
Oh, of course they did, because they have the Spotify stock options. I mean, there was a closed-door meeting with the major labels and Spotify when Spotify was launching, and the quid pro quo was Spotify wants your back catalog, and we're going to enrich you guys as much as you want. Well, who didn't have a seat at that meeting? The artists, the songwriters, the producers.
Yeah.
They didn't have a seat at that meeting. So everybody walked out high-fiving, right?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you get the articles like the one about Pharrell making $16,000 on Happy the year it was the number 1 played song on Spotify.
Yeah, that's insane.
So this is basically what happened. I mean, this has been going on forever. I mean, this is the kind of the sick nature of the art and commerce relationship writ large. But it's the music always. It's like water. It always finds a way to get through and survive. The question is, how many of us as human beings with families are gonna stay in the game?
Yeah. Also, it's interesting. Because you play an actual instrument, which seems to be increasingly rare. Like as a guitar player, like it's amazing. Like because I love the guitar, and but I just go see bands now, or I hear about it. It's not the kind of bands I see, but like it's just like a laptop, and then that's the show.
I mean, look, we're definitely gonna relate to each other. I mean, I think it seems like we're both your typical hopeless romantic of Generation X. I was lucky enough to be raised like in the early 90s in Milwaukee, which probably you won't hear many people say. But
I'm pro Milwaukee.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Are you from the Midwest?
I am. I'm from Cleveland.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm all about it.
I was looking. It's funny, like 'cause I saw that you played with like Clyde Stubblefield. growing up?
Yeah, I played with his band a couple times, and I used to go see him at the Globe a lot, which was his his every Monday thing. And I worked with a lot of guys in his band too, regularly.
Wow.
And Hubert Sumlin and Pinetop Perkins, Buddy Miles, they were all the local talent at the time that would hang out at the jam sessions. So I ended up working with all of them and touring on the Chitlin circuits of the Midwest and stuff, which all these guys were washed up in that circuit. But when they would go to Europe, they were huge. And they would basically just keep homes in Wisconsin during this time period.
Yeah, why Wisconsin? Were they from there, or did they just gravitate?
Hubert,
there?
It was the proximity to Chicago.
Yeah,
and
so they just
Pinetop
moved
was in
north.
Chicago, but he would come up to Milwaukee all the time.
Uh-huh.
Buddy Miles, he was moving all over the place, and he was staying with this woman at the time who lived in Milwaukee. It just so happened when I was living there.
Uh-huh.
It was a lucky coincidence. Clyde, it was Madison. I'm not sure why. I know Clyde. I think Clyde was from down south, but he ended up living in Madison, Wisconsin, which is a nice little town.
I love Madison.
Yeah.
It's like a little. They have it all.
Yeah. Well, we used to have it all with those guys being around, and we had great vinyl record stores. The Jazz Record Mart in Chicago I used to go to all the time, and then, that was really, really on the hopeless romantic side of things. I mean, we used to chase down these vinyl records, like Donny Hathaway Live and, Bobby Womack stuff and the Grant Green funk stuff. I mean, you couldn't find any of that on CD yet. So you'd have to go raid these record bins and find these used records, or find an older guy who had a copy of these and then make cassettes. And
Yeah.
so when you would find these records, it was like finding a treasure.
Yeah.
And you would just live with it for months. And for me personally, I would sit and learn every note of the chord changes, the melodies, the solos, the harmony, the way the band played together. And then I would disseminate that to my friends, whether they be old or young, and then we would start incorporating those songs into our repertoire. Mm-hmm. After a trip to New Orleans when I was about 16 to visit a friend who's going to college at the time at Tulane, I came back with like an armful of Meters records. And you could find I guess it would have been you could find the early stuff, like the instrumentals on CD, but you couldn't find any of the 70s stuff with Cyril, with the vocals, And I came back with like Cabbage Alley and Rejuvenation, and we started playing all that stuff in the band I was in at the time in Milwaukee. And man, we had this every Thursday night gig that was crazy. And these college kids would go nuts, and they thought we wrote all these songs. They couldn't just pull out a phone and look for it.
Oh,
you know? And I had these vinyls, and no one else literally had this music in that city at that time. Mm-hmm. At least not that I knew in the music community.
Do you still collect vinyl?
Yeah, I mean, it's space is an issue, so I try not to, add too much to what I already have.
But do you do this like with guitars? Like, 'cause your main guitar, you're Les Paul primarily, right?
Well, it looks kind of like a Les Paul or a 335. It's sort of a hybrid. It's called the 336. Custom Shop 336.
I know what this. Yeah.
Well, they only made it well, in my opinion, for about the first or second run of production, which was probably 2001 or 2, because I got it the year it came out.
Oh, yeah.
And
looking.
At that time, it was a Custom Shop instrument that was made in Nashville, and they were doing it with a real eye to detail. I think they were trying to really make an impression on the market at the time, and they were doing something with the sound cavity inside. They were calling it tonally carved. They were taking the shape of a Gibson L5 archtop guitar and kind of shrinking it down to the size of this body, which is a slightly smaller 335. Guitar weighs about 7 pounds or so. It's really light, and it's super, super resonant. So the first time I got it, I was living in New York City. I've lived here for 22 years when I got it, but I ordered it from a music store in Michigan online. And I kind of took a risk, and I just looked at it, and I said, this is so unique. It's Tangerine Burst, which is a color I don't think they ever did again. And when I pulled it out, it was just one of those classic moments when, you know the deal. You have these guitars here are beautiful, so you know the deal when you find a guitar that really resonates with you. And as soon as I picked it up and played it, I was like, this is what I've been looking for, right away. Because I've been playing a 335 and a Strat pretty much my whole life, and kind of going back and forth and bringing the two to gigs, and The best way I can describe this guitar is once I picked it up, it felt like the perfect combination of the two.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the weight, the resonance of it, the neck. It's got my 336 has a slim 59 Gibson neck, which is the one they put on a lot of the semi-hollows in 59. And those are like my favorite guitars. I would have one if I could ever afford one. They're usually like 10 to 15 grand or 20 grand. But this guitar has that neck. And I ended up many years later buying another one on eBay, same year, but Tobacco Burst. So those are they're my main guitars.
So you got, and they got to you, and they were, because that can be like a roll of the dice to order a guitar online.
This had like that 2-week return policy.
Oh, okay.
Though. So I was safe, you know.
Yeah, that's good. So you don't collect, you don't hoard guitars? That's the problem I run into.
Well, my dad is a guitar player and singer, and I grew up, you know, surrounded by about 5 or 6 instruments. He'd gotten it down to like about a half dozen or so of the ones. And nice. I have one of them is a 1940s Martin 0018, which is my baby. That's the first guitar I ever played. And he got it for like a few $100 in Ann Arbor, Michigan, back in the 60s. Yeah,
guitar?
It is, yeah. And that's my favorite acoustic. So I sort of inherited that one. And I also inherited his 60s Jumbo Guild 12-string, which is beautiful, too. And then the same shop where he got those guitars was this guy, Herb David. And he was a friend of my dad's, and he's a very famous figure in sort of the Midwest guitar market. I mean, he used to sell guitars to everybody, like Jimmy Page and Pete Townsend and Hendrix and all the guys who used to come through Ann Arbor used to buy from him. You know, Herb's not there anymore. He retired and disappeared. I've been trying to find him for a while. But he also gave me a 69 Strat a while back. Like when I was in my teens, I was touring all the time, and I had stopped in the shop. And it was one of those, you know, oh yeah, I've had something waiting for you kind of moments.
Oh, really?
And it's got, you know, Hendrix used to trade guitars there all the time, and it's got a strap post for a lefty. So it's been rumored that it was one of his parts guitars, but I can't verify it.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, it's probably best not to verify it. Just always kind of have the mystery.
So I take that in the studio sometimes. But those are the only guitars I have of any kind of like vintage note. You know, everything else is newer. Although I have been collecting these Harmony Bobcat guitars for a while. They're like $400 or $500.
Oh yeah, I know that guitar.
But they sound amazing. And for slide, I mean, they're all I use in the studio are those. And I've got 3 of them now. They've got those DeArmond gold foil pickups in them that you know, everyone started getting really hot on those a few years ago. And I think Lawler even makes one now. I think there was a long time where people used to buy these Bobcats and they just rip the pickups out and put them in other guitars. But I had this tech, DeWitt Burton, who's he you know, every guitar tech I've had over the years has taught me some kind of significant lesson about like, here, check this out. And DeWitt was definitely one of them. And he had a Bobcat and he brought it to a rehearsal one time and I played it. And the second I put a glass slide on it, I was like, this is the guitar, man. This is the business. So I just went and right there that day I just bought 2.
Oh, nice.
You know, on Reverb or eBay or whatever it was.
And do you take them on the road with you?
I used to. With my band, I don't play as much slide as I did. Like with Greg Allman, it was obviously like a key part of the gig when I was doing it. With my band, you know, I can't really. I do some different things with guitars. Like I have a 60s reissue Strat that I tuned down a half step that I use on some stuff because I really love the sound of a Strat tuned down. So that's kind of fun. We use that on some stuff. And then, you know, I have a Telecaster that I love dearly that's like a parts guitar that I use usually I use that in the studio for all my rhythm stuff. But I bring that on the road. And then my 336, my 2 336 guitars. So, you know, once 4 flight cases are in my van, it's over. It's not like when I was touring with Greg where we had an 18-wheel, truck taking all the stuff to every gig, and I had, you know, a guy cleaning the stuff and taking care of it every day, you know.
I want to ask you about that. How did that come about? You were Greg Allman's band leader.
Yeah, well, I started out as his guitarist. That was summer of 2008. My buddy Jay Collins, who played sax in Greg's band for like 15, 16 years, he got me an audition with Greg, which was sitting in with the Allman Brothers, and it went great.
Wait, so the audition? Yeah, I was reading about that. So your audition was you just joined them on stage?
Yeah, I played a couple of songs with them.
Wow.
But I grew up with the music. I mean, one of the ways I learned to play music was through the Allman Brothers. I mean, they were, my house was really, my parents grew up in like Ann Arbor and Detroit in the 60s, so a big deal was like soul music was a big thing. Like my dad had, bands who had like the Beatles outfits, but they played nothing but Motown music. And, the Temps played their high school graduation and, seeing Junior Walker and the All-Stars and Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels. They were kind of from that thing. But the Allman Brothers were really highly touted in my house as being like, this is a bunch of guys who can actually play like blues and actually explore like jazz and do it all under the guise of rock and roll as like this perfect fusion. So very early on, I held them up as the example of like, this is what I want to do with my life from when I was a little kid. And then I saw them live when I was, for the first time, the Allman Brothers Band, when I was probably in my early teens. I might have been 13 or something, 12 or 13. And it was the band with, Warren Haynes and Dickie Betts. This was like when they had just gotten back together, for the Seven Turns era. Yeah. And, it changed my life. I think around that same time, maybe a year or two before that, I saw Stevie Ray Vaughan play with Jeff Beck.
Oh, wow.
So those two concerts were like, here's some guys who just get up on stage and they're playing in, sheds for a few thousand people.
Yeah.
But they can play Stormy Monday. They can play the blues, but then they can also go in all these different directions with songs as the reason to show up. And literally since that day, or that time in my life, that's been my goal, is like, write Whipping Post and Midnight Rider forever and then get them to show up so you can drag it out here and there.
Yeah.
So by the time I got to summer of 2008 and got on the stage with them for the first time, I'd been preparing for that moment since the earliest memories I had of listening to music. So it was not, I was definitely sick with worry on the side of the stage because I'd never met any of them before, right? That was the main thing. I'd never met Warren or Derek. I'd played with a lot of my heroes, like I mentioned before, like Hubert Sumlin and Buddy when I was a teenager, and then, Levon Helm I'd work with on and off, through the last decade of his life. But nothing really prepared me for meeting all them at once. You know?
That would be... I met Warren Haynes weirdly at the airport. Not weirdly, I guess.
He's probably always in the airport.
Yeah, we were both coming back from Bonnaroo like 10 years ago or something. And we started talking, and then and I had a fire. I was waiting for my Firebird to come out, and I was just like, "Oh, you should sign it." It's actually in the back. He signed the Firebird, and then I was doing this show at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater when it was on 23rd Street, where I would have sort of like a talk show. And so I had emailed like his person and about him doing the show, and then he said he was going to do it, and then they're like, "Oh, that's actually the night after they were doing what's that place in Washington Heights that they did a run at?"
Oh, when they did the Palace, was that called?
Yeah, United Palace.
Yeah.
So he's like, "Oh, it turns out it's like that's the night after they finished like 10 nights or whatever they did." And so he thinks it's too much to do it, but he wanted to invite you to come as like friends and family.
Oh, nice.
And it was so nice of him. And so I went with my brother-in-law. But I remember, this is a long way of saying that I was standing on the side. They had about like, I don't know, 15, 20 people on each side of the stage. And I just remember being like, oh my God, like Greg Allman is right there.
Yeah.
So like, and I was not not playing with him, but I was just like, what? He's like a historical figure.
Yeah.
In rock.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing with Greg was, it was truly all about the music with him, and I think with all those guys. But, Greg, and it all goes back, obviously, to Greg and specifically Duane. Duane was the guy who started the Allman Brothers Band.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably no doubt that Greg would have had a prolific career as a singer-songwriter if it hadn't been for his brother. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that his brother was a master, not just a master as a guitar player, but he was a master band leader and sort of, wrangler of all these personalities. Mm-hmm. And I think he really inspired Greg to create at a level that he wasn't even able to really sustain consistently after Duane passed away. And I think any of those guys in that band would tell you that the best they ever played was when Duane was on stage with them, mm-hmm. So it was always an interesting, I think, conundrum for Greg being in the Allman Brothers Band, because ever since his brother passed away in 1971, tragically, after their third studio album wasn't even finished, Eat a Peach. They had, mm-hmm. I think they'd had 2 studio albums and the Live at the Fillmore East, and then Eat a Peach was in process, and that's when he got killed. I think from that day, I think Greg never recovered from that. Mm-hmm. And I think, everything was sort of in fits and starts with him sort of creatively and what he wanted to do, because it was such a conflict of having to carry his brother's band on. And of course, Dickie Betts picked up the baton, in the 70s, and they had their biggest commercial success with the songs that he wrote. And the band, and this is all well documented in a bunch of different books about them and documentaries, but, the band really fractured after Duane passed, and then of course they had this huge business fallout with Capricorn Records and Phil Walden, and mm-hmm. There was a lot of shenanigans going on with their money, and and the money was all getting divided up on the guy who wrote the song, and then people were trying to get songs on records, and then people were writing songs and not getting credit, and the cocaine and the 70s, where music was the highest grossing form of entertainment, basically, mm-hmm. Especially record album sales. And I think Greg heavily medicated himself through all that. Yeah. But the specter behind all of it was his brother. Mm-hmm. And I think the only reason he stayed in it so long and he kept coming back to it was to honor his brother. Yeah. His own band, the Greg Allman Band, was always his life's ambition, because he always explained it as the Greg Allman Band was him getting back to what him and his brother used to fantasize about doing when they were teenagers, seeing those blues reviews with Bobby Bland and B.B. King and Johnny Taylor and Little Milton, and, where these bands would have, the B3 organ. That was the first time he saw an organ, was on one of those reviews, and they'd have the horns. As I always used to say, the horns, And his favorite guitar player, besides his brother, was Wayne Bennett from Bobby Bland's group. And, mm-hmm. Wayne and Bobby had this way of playing on those records, like Further On Up the Road and Stormy Monday and stuff. Particularly Stormy Monday was sort of the template for how Greg and Duane used to play together, where Greg would sing and Duane would answer. But, what happened with the Allman Brothers Band is they got away from that vision because, rock and roll developed rapidly. The Marshall Stacks, the psychedelic rock influenced, blues coming out of England, of Cream and Hendrix. And Duane was right on top of that. And he brought that in. And then, of course, they were listening to Coltrane's Love Supreme and Miles Davis's Kind of Blue and Pharoah Sanders. And, they were like way deep on all this stuff. So when you listen to the Allman Brothers Band, you hear all of that. And
absolutely.
I think as much as Greg loved all that music, I think he was a song guy first. Uh-huh. So in his band, he kind of got back to that. It was like that R&B band sound mixed with the songcraft. That was so important to him, And as it is to me, there was something that really resonated for us, was like the blues and songwriting. Mm-hmm. Like, those were the things that really deeply resonated for us. And I think that's how I ended up becoming his music director, band leader, or whatever you call it. I mean, it really felt like a band, but I was definitely calling the shots for him.
So would you rehearse the band without him?
Yeah, frequently. Yeah, we would do the sound checks without him, and he would attend the formal rehearsals, but the sound checks we would expand into rehearsals, and he wouldn't attend those most of the time. But he was always very involved. I think I just had to help him, to find the right mix of personalities, which we really got dialed in by the time we did the Southern Blood album. And then the other thing was songwriting. We finished writing a couple songs together, and he used to sing one of my songs, Love Like Kerosene, that he recorded twice. He did it on Back to Making Live and Southern Blood. So we managed to get 2 albums done while I was working with him. But he always said that those albums and that sort of last draft of the band was really the vision he had for a group from when he was a kid had finally come to fruition. Mm-hmm. And that was really a point of pride for all of us. And
that's pretty awesome.
Because we did it as a team. It was an amazing band and an amazing crew. And our road manager Vid and Chank Middleton, Greg's best friend, who had been traveling with him the whole time, was such a motivator. And it was that was kind of our road family when we were out there. And that road family is what really kept him going and kept him creatively alive.
So how much was he on tour with both? He was doing 2 massive productions.
Yeah, well, the Allman Brothers, they didn't do a lot of touring in the last few years of their existence. I mean, the Beacon Run was an obvious thing in New York, and then they had their festivals. What was it, Wani, and there was another, the Peach Festival. But, what we would do is we'd do 60 to 80 dates a year with the Greg Allman Band for the first, 6 years I was in the group. But then at the end, in the last, whatever it was, 3 years or so, once the Allman Brothers were winding down, and then broke up, we started to tour a lot more. The last year of the Greg Allman Band, we probably did about 100 dates, including things where we would play duo acoustic, stuff like that, because he would always take me to that. And then I also did a number of TV shows with him and Grammy Foundation events where I would either musically direct or co-musically direct these big ensembles that had a number of artists, and I would come in and do Greg's songs with him, stuff like that.
That you mentioned the band leader aspect of just the whole thing. That's I feel like people don't really talk about that, 'cause that's a whole other skill. I feel like most people don't know about is being able to deal with all the different personalities, and you have to have I guess there's the Buddy Rich model.
Yeah, I mean,
and
that's
then, and then there's this,
Buddy's name is on the marquee, so
yeah.
I mean, it's more I like to think of Quincy Jones with Sinatra. That's what I used to think about with Greg, because I always called Greg the Frank Sinatra of rock and roll. I always felt that way about him. He's a phone book singer. You just hand him the phone book and you've got a song.
Yeah.
And Greg, of course, had more skills in some ways than Sinatra, because he not only did he have that voice, but he had that writing talent.
Yeah.
But there was that sort of aspect to it, and I love being the right-hand man if I'm with somebody who believes in the band and has a real vision for what they do that I admire. Because, I myself, I've been a singer-songwriter and my own band leader for over 20 years, and a producer, and I love to produce records for other people, doing my own. I mean, that's really my happiest place is, making records and making those. I consider records to be like paintings,
Yeah,
absolutely. And playing live shows, it's really performance art. It's a different bag.
Mm-hmm.
So, bringing all those disciplines together is what being the right guy for the job is in terms of being a band leader. But you've also got to have, besides all that creative stuff that I mentioned, the songwriter, understanding songwriting and band leading and arranging and respecting the singer and the process, you've also got to have managerial skills. And I'm a total type A personality, and so is my father. I mean, it's I inherited, his ability to rally the troops And I consider that to be part of making the whole thing a journey together. Like, I can't emphasize enough, like when I talk about my work with Greg specifically, we had such a great team. And what I tried to foster in my role is, encouraging everyone's love for the project and fostering this environment of a family. And, but to Greg's credit, he had my back with that, as I had his back with doing the tough stuff to keep that going.
Yeah.
Because he took care of the band. He took care of everybody. He loved everybody. He treated everyone with respect and kindness. And
because it's easy.
It's hard the other way,
Yeah, it's easy for a band to go off the rails too. Like, even, it's like why bands break up on tour.
Well, we went off the rails. I mean, we went through a lot of different personnel, and we had problems, but we shielded Greg from that. And what that allowed us is it always allowed Greg to be sort of immune. But the thing with that, as a band leader, or the tour manager, we had Vid Sutherland, who's sort of and I mean this in a way that is very with the highest level of respect. He was a Machiavellian genius as a tour manager, and I think for good, So without that framework, where you have a Greg Allman, where he goes on stage and it is time to play some music, capital M. That puts musicians in a good spot, because that's coming every night. You're going to get that hit. You're going to really make some music. And that would turn people on in the audience. And you'd have that sort of circle going every night. That's incentive. But then there's the other 22 hours of the day, okay?
Yeah.
And that's what kills bands.
Yeah.
Or it's what happens on stage, where you're playing with somebody who's a vapid, terrible pop artist to the musicians. And actually, the 22 hours of the day of, getting some good food or getting wasted is like the best thing that happens to you. Then you got to go play this crap music.
Yeah.
We talk about the, the 3 points or the triangle in music, right? There's like the hang, the money, and the art, right? Or the music, And Greg had all three.
Yeah.
And when you have all three covered, you can't ever really do anything else again. So few guys get to hit the gig where you have all three. And if you're like me, where you do it for 9 years, it's like doing heroin for 9 years. Nothing else will ever compare.
Right.
You'll never get that high back again. Like, it's just, there's something about it when those three things fire on all cylinders. I feel very lucky to have done that, and to have done it with one of my musical heroes,
Yeah. That's amazing. That's sort of like when you play with a great drummer, you can never go back to like your buddy from high school again.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
Like when you're like, oh, this is what a good drummer is, and then it's like, oh, I can't ever. How am I gonna?
There are other layers to that too, man. Like I've always played the drums. Like my whole life, we always had drums and a bass and guitar around. And even on my first solo album, I played all the instruments on most of that record. But yeah, I'm with you on the drum thing, man. It's like I always say, a band is only as good as its drummer and its singer. But if you don't have any songs, there's no reason to even show up.
Yeah.
But once you got the songs, if those are the two things that people will know on a cellular level if they're wrong, because those were the first things humans ever did to make music.
Right.
Was sing and bang on shit.
Yeah, and then when when you go see a band, and you're like, some people maybe can't put their finger on like, why is this band so awesome, or why are they so awful? And it's usually the drummer.
Yeah, they know
the
know intrinsically, but they don't know how to express what's going on. They don't know how to explain like what's going on that's making it not happening. Mm-hmm. That's another part of being a band leader, is being really sensitive to all those dynamics of a band to get it dialed in so that it's swinging. Because the bass and drums thing is a particular passion of mine. Because the guitar, bass, and drums is the tripod. It's what everything rests on.
Yeah.
And, in the kind of music I love and the kind of music I play. So, if those things are not locked in a very compatible way, actually the whole thing will fold ultimately.
Yeah, and it's also like, I mean, everyone's got to be sharp, but you have to. If the drums, to me, the drums and bass especially, like, if it like when I see like a bass player's like clam notes and things like that, I'm just like, oh, get that guy out of here. Like,
I can forgive him more than the drummer, though.
Yeah, I guess so.
They can make more mistakes than the drums.
But like guitar, you can like, you know,
you can totally fake guitar.
Wiggle room there.
Yeah. People don't know with the guitar.
Yeah, you can fix stuff. You can go back in time and you know, go back half second, be like, oh, I meant to do that.
Yeah, as long as the singer comes in at the right time and the drums are consistent, the guitar can pretty much do anything.
Yeah, it's an easier job in that regard. So what do you have coming up in terms of?
That's a good question. Well, we just this last year was, you know, the release of my newest record, Saving Grace. So we toured all over for that. We did over 100 dates last year. You were just
at Brooklyn Bowl recently.
Yeah, and I'm going to be there again in March.
Oh, nice.
We play there pretty regularly. Mm-hmm. Rockwood Music Hall, Stage 2, and Brooklyn Bowl are our New York hits. And then we play in the Hudson Valley frequently. Like, we do quarterly shows at, like, the Falcon, if you know that place up in Marlboro. It's a beautiful venue. The Colony in Woodstock, and, you know, there's this beautiful old barn. There's a lot of these gigs called the Cock and Bull that's way up in Galway. So we hit those like every quarter. So we stay pretty active like in the New York area throughout the year. But last year we got all over the place. Like we went to France and I was in Japan and we had some great shows. And the record did really well. I mean, we charted on the Billboard Blues charts pretty high, and we did you know, it's still getting a lot of play on Sirius. So, you know, it did pretty well. But you know, this year I'm looking towards, you know, trying to turn the page, and I'm getting even farther into my own artistic vision again, you know, because the last 2 years were, you know, coming up on 2 years next May has been, you know, kind of burying Greg Allman, because it's, when you spend a decade with someone like that,
yeah, that's heavy.
You know, and we were living on a bus together. I was at his house all the time. You know, we wrote that song, "My Only True Friend," that we were nominated for a Grammy for. So there was this whole, the Southern Blood album. I was a big part of that. I played on it and helped Greg pick all the songs and worked with Don Was, and that was a big project, and it consumed my life. And then with the Grammy nominations in Americana for the album and for the song I wrote, it was like this steep, you know, we were on this trajectory.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we didn't get the Grammys, and then the record label, in my opinion, completely fucked up the record and the promotion of it. And, of course, the guy who was in charge of pushing the record has now been replaced. And, you know, but that led to this sort of like, okay, now what? And, of course, I had my album, Saving Grace, sitting in the hopper throughout all this, and I was waiting to release it in anticipation to what was going to happen with the Southern Blood project that I was such a big part of. So then we finally decided, we being me and my manager, Jesse, we finally decided, like, we went down a bunch of blind alleys with record labels. We were made a lot of promises that were not being fulfilled, and we were watching a lot of, you know, my peers be screwed by all their different deals. So I said, to hell with this, we're self-releasing. Did a big pledge campaign, raised a bunch of money, got the record out.
Oh, nice.
But we actually swiped the record a couple of years ago. We recorded Saving Grace in 2016, and it was my dream record. I mean, we went to Muscle Shoals, to Fame Studios, and did half. And then the other half we did in Memphis, and we used, in Muscle Shoals, we used the Swampers like Spooner Oldham and David Hood and Chad Gamble from Jason Isbell's band on drums. And then in Memphis, we used my favorite, you know, one of my favorite rhythm sections of all time, the high rhythm section. So Howard Grimes, Charles, and Leroy Hodges. And they played on all the Al Green records and Syl Johnson, all the high records stuff.
Yeah.
So
sharpshooters.
Yeah, man. Like legends, you know, and so, and I also had this song that Greg and I had finished writing that it was supposed to be on Southern Blood, and we had run out of time because of, you know, Greg's health to get it recorded. So Taj Mahal had contacted me, and I tried to give it to Greg's record label, and they weren't interested. So I decided I'm going to put this on my record. So then I got Bernard Purdy to play drums on that with Taj. We added that. And I even got to use Duane Allman's 57 Gold Top Les Paul on
wow.
a few songs. So Saving Grace was really like...
Where is that?
That's at the Big House Museum in Macon, and my friend Richard Brent, who runs that museum, he brought it to Muscle Shoals, which I was also playing it in Fame, where Duane used to cut tracks with it. So it was spine tingling, man.
Man, I'd be stressed out. I would be afraid to drop it.
I mean, Greg gave me access to it. I have him to thank, And I used to play it on shows with Greg whenever we would play in the Georgia area.
Oh, really?
They'd bring it down, and I'd play it. So I had familiarity with the guitar.
Oh, wow.
And it's an amazing instrument. But so that record...
What's a guitar like? That must be...
Oh, God, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They have it insured for like a ridiculous amount of money.
Wow.
But that record, the Saving Grace record, was really like my turning of the page, like my it's really like my love letter to all my influences and all the guys who raised me. Everybody from my experiences with, Willie Higgins and Harvey Scales and Hubert Sumlin and Buddy Miles when I was a kid, all the way through to my interactions and playing with guys like Levon Helm, and then obviously the Greg Allman and the Allman family, who, still I'm doing some gigs with J-Mo and March, and being connected to all that. And then, of course, stretching into the Swampers, who did so many great records with Duane, and then my Memphis connection to High Rhythm. And those guys, I wanted to really, while I could still, these guys are all in their 70s, and I really wanted to, Taj Mahal. I really wanted to get all of them on a record while they could still kick ass.
Yeah.
And they did.
When you
amazing.
play with guys like this, how much rehearsal is needed?
None.
They can just hit it.
Yeah. I mean, I sent them the tracks in advance, but I mean, most of the takes are first or second takes.
Wow.
I mean, also, we know, Charlie Martinez, my engineer and co-producer for over 20 years, and then my co-producer specifically on Saving Grace, also Scott Bomar, who has Electrophonic in Memphis. We have we have a philosophy that all three of us as producers, and the reason I wanted both of them involved was because I wanted to set the table of if we have the right songs and we have the right players, all we have to do is worry about the catering. We don't have to worry about anything else. And that's how I run sessions. So, and that's how I run bands. So I make sure I have the right people first. That way my ass is covered in terms of the music, at least. And then for the hang, all you got to do is have the barbecue and the drinks and the pot. You have all this shit laid out. And nobody does this right, by the way. Mm-hmm. But we pride ourselves on doing it. And when you set that table, literally, for musicians, and they show up, they're ready to jam.
Yeah.
And then you sit down and play, and you just have a lot of laughs, and you don't overanalyze anything, and you let the moment carry you. You let the hang carry you through the music. That's when you get the shit. And you'll be in and out of the office in 4 hours. And we were every day. We had these guys in and out. And these guys were, the most amazing thing was to watch these guys, especially the high rhythm guys, because we got really close. We got to spend more time with them. And just to watch those guys like high five each other in the studio and be like, man, we're getting some great takes and this is so much fun. And then then us being like, yeah, that's it. And they're like, what do you mean? Everybody makes us work more. And we're like, no, you guys, you did it. Like, it's done. It's like to feel that we can give them the respect they deserve and then also get this incalculable gift of their talent on a record. I mean, that's the best there is in music, to have that feeling. I mean, there's no amount you can pay for that. It's a spiritual experience. And then it's
absolutely.
on this record forever that you can share. And I've been really, really lucky in my life to intersect with people and have this experience over and over again. And every time I have it, I sit there and I try to revel in it, because it doesn't happen all the time. But to engineer it and be part of it. And that record, the Saving Grace record, I'm extremely proud of for that. And also Greg Allman's Southern Blood. It had we fostered the same vibe with that record as well. So I was part of these two releases, and now I'm moving on in March. I'm starting my new record, and it's going to be very intense. It's a sort of a concept record.
Oh, nice.
I had like 40 songs that I wrote over the last 2 years.
Oh, wow.
That I've whittled down to about 12, and then I have a few cover ideas, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but I think the material is going to speak for itself. It's definitely the most like personal material I've ever written in my career. And I've been on the road with this trio for the last year with Eric Kalb and Brett Bass, and we really have a very special gel.
And will you do it with them?
Yeah.
Same.
So yeah, I'm going to try to this is the first time on one of my records that I'm really going to have been able to capture a band that I toured with hard. Like I had the Brickyard Band I did a couple records with of my own. But we never really toured extensively. I was always on the road with Greg, and then we'd play in the tri-state area, occasionally grab a festival here or there. But this band I have now, it plays like a band. And that'll be the core of the tracks. But it's going to be a pretty, I've been trying to find ways to describe the sound of what this material is. And the closest I've come is it's going to be kind of like Funkadelic meets Pink Floyd or something.
Oh, nice.
It's going to be sort of a psychedelic soul, folk, blues record. And
awesome.
it's going to be a pretty wide canvas, man.
And where will you do that with pledges as well? Do you do pledge music?
Yeah, we did it for the last record. I didn't, we didn't have a great experience with them. I think we're still trying to get paid.
Oh, okay.
But
I was gonna if you were doing it again, we'll cut it out. But if you were doing it,
is that a sponsor?
No. I was gonna say, like, if you're doing it, we push people to start pledging.
I would push people to get pledged to pay people. No. I'm literally selling gear to do this album.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I'm gonna do this one on my own.
What are you selling? That's the big question.
No, it's a secret. I've already got buyers.
Oh man.
No, we're ready to go, man. We're gonna do this thing.
Gear.
Yeah, we're gonna do this thing.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was fun, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
It's a beautiful place you got here.
Thank you. Thanks for putting up with my co-host. Lucy was actually a good
She's totally mellow.
Co-host.
You sprayed the protector.
I think, yeah. I brought the hammer down.
Totally getting it.
And took her to the park this morning, tired her out.
Sweet.
But
it's always a good angle.
Sometimes she's interrupts a lot more. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you, buddy.
And there you have it. My lovely conversation with Scott Sharrard. Seek him out. He rules. His music rules. His guitar playing rules. And he's a fine fellow, as you can tell. And I hope to have him back and just totally just talk about gear and be like, talk about string gauges. And I'll put an asterisk next to that if you are frightened by gear talk. So you can, but I love gear talk. I'm flying right into the sun on that one. I'm like a 24/7 NAMM convention at my house. Anyway, thank you to my partner in crime, Mr. Chris Gersbeck. Chris also has the plague, probably worse than I do. Did I catch it from him? Not speculating, don't know. Could have caught it from someone on the subway. I licked the handle, what are those called? What's the thing, the bar and stuff? I can't even remember basic words. I mean, let's be honest. If you're familiar with my work, the spoken word part, the writing, impeccable. But the speaking part, I struggle talking. Can't remember words. Subway pole, I think they call them. Yeah, I like those. Doorknobs. That's probably why I'm sick. But hopefully I'll get through this and live to see another podcast. Anyway, thank you for listening. Please rate, review, and subscribe again and again on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to stuff. Thanks to everyone listening on FooBar. And thanks for everyone supporting us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Dave Hill and kick in what you can. Help us keep this the slickest show in the game. Chris, maybe add some echo after I say the slickest show in the game. Game. Alright, that's about it. I know I've threatened to take a shower. I think it's time. Let's do this. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye. I'm Dave Hill. Stay street, stay hydrated, get tested. I should have said that and then bye-bye. Don't edit this, Chris. Don't do me those favors. Let me live with my mistakes. Okay, I love you guys so much.
Oh no, since you've been gone.